So that was the third time we used film and then video in Labrador. One new thing we did in that period, we took a single theme and we said, let's look at the communication needs of the people of Labrador all along the coast. And that was great for me because I had a little 30-foot boat and spent 3 months just cruising from village to village talking to people about communications and got paid for it. I said, geez. And when we did that, we edited that material down with the permission of the people to about a 40 to 45-minute presentation on the people's views of communication needs along the Labrador coast. And we accompanied it with a written... So in 1970, we took this single theme of communication needs all along the Labrador coast and edited that down to a presentation, which was a little different than the other kind of non-issue directed but broad view of the community. And it was very interesting what the people said, because it was at a time when the Bell Telephone Company of Canada was installing a modern system along the Labrador coast. But as they were installing it, they were disassembling the Marconi radio telephones that people had been using before then. And these radio telephones were used as a critical kind of a social gossip system, not just for telegrams, but somebody in Port Hope Simpson would call out to Williams Harbor and say, Aunt Mabel is on the way out with Uncle Herb and the kids. If the wind blows up, they should be getting there around 6 p.m. Keep an eye out for them. Or somebody would say there's ice moving in on the southern shore, better get your nets up. Or somebody would say the salmon are striking in on the White Gull River. It's a good time to come set your nets. So it was a very important informal network. And the people said, this network is different than the uses we would put to a phone system, and it's a non-competitive use. We are prepared to pay for the cost of this system if they will let us keep it. And we took this tape. That was just one part of along the whole coast on communication needs. We took this tape to Ottawa and showed it to the Department of Communications, which paid for that project, to the minister and to the deputy minister. The minister at the time was Tom Kierans. And Don Jameson, who was Minister of Transport, attended the screening as well. And these people were enormously impressed by what the Labrador people said. And Tom Kierans said, we also had the vice president of Bell Telephone Company there. And Tom Kierans turned to him and says, they make a lot of sense. He said, that's not competing with you. Can't you change your policy? To the vice president of Bell Telephone. And the vice president said, yes, they do make sense. We'll change our policy. So, in fact, because of that presentation, Bell Telephone changed their policy, and the people got to keep the radio telephones. The triumph of the people. I've never bothered to tell Bell Telephone, they probably know it anyway, that 2 years after the new telephone system was in, nobody bothered to use the old RF system anyway. So people aren't always right in terms of their own predictions, but they had used it, and it had served an important function for them. Well, it was also at about this time in the early 70s that word got out about the use of film and video and its effectiveness as a social change catalyst. And Don Snowden and colleagues of his began to take it outside of the province. And one of the first places was out to Farmersville in California, where Cesar Chavez and the grape growers were having their struggles. And it was used there. It was used in Hartford, Connecticut, with people with tenant relations in urban slums. It was used in a fascinating project in Alaska called the Sky River Project, where the native Inuit population were given a voice through the use of film in advocating for themselves what shape they wanted to see their communities take. And this was done by a man named Tim Kennedy, who wrote a very interesting thesis called Beyond Advocacy, which we have here. Then later in the late 70s, Don Snowden started to use this same kind of process in the developing world. It was used in India, Bangladesh, China, Uganda, particularly in India, where Don had spent 4 or 5 years. And I'm going to show you a little illustration of that shortly. And Don died in 1984 while doing this work in India. And Memorial University decided that we would continue the work and establish a center in his name. Hence the Don Snowden Center for Development Support Communications. And we have continued that work in India, in Nepal, now in Zanzibar, in Thailand, where you will see for yourself what's being done. So that's a little bit of background on the Fogo process and the use of film and video as a catalyst in social animation. And what I would like to do now is show you some short examples, starting from the very beginning, and that illustrate what we're talking about, because that's the best way to do it. But when I show you these examples, you want to bear in mind that I'm only showing you snippets, that the process as it was applied was really showing 3 or 4 or 5 of these completed modules in the context of a community gathering where people then would have discussions after. One other example I might mention before I go on to the examples. One of our field workers on the Burin Peninsula, any of you from the Burin? Are you? Yeah, who was based at the time at Lameline, videotaped, with the permission of the people, a town or community meeting that ended in an election of a community council. But it was a meeting where there had been a lot of drinking, either beforehand, and there was a lot of manipulating going on. And in fact, the people that were put in place were not who the community really wanted in place. And the next day, the field workers showed the videotape back to the community, and they looked at it and they were horrified at the process that went on. And they said, "This is terrible. We want to invalidate that meeting and that election and do it all over again." And I believe they did. And they had another election and completely changed the makeup of the community council. So that's some of the history of all of this. It's been put as a chapter in a book called Development Communications, a Multinational Perspective. And I made copies of it today, so I'll give you that when you leave. And what I'm going to do now is put on some examples and show them to you, and we can talk about them and then have a discussion. Okay? Do you want to have a cup of coffee or something before we do that?
I'm fine.
Everybody fine? Okay.